Declassified files tell us much about the Cold War, the arms race, the proxy conflicts, the espionage. But there are some documents that remain redacted even today, not because they contain military secrets, but because what they describe defies explanation. My name is Robert Harmon. In 1953, I was a counterintelligence officer assigned as a liaison to the Soviet NKVD under an unusual scientific exchange program, a rare moment of cooperation in the Cold War. What I witnessed in a classified facility deep in the Ural Mountains was suppressed by both American and Soviet authorities. After 70 years of silence, this is my testimony. For decades, both governments dismissed my report as the delusions of a man who'd spent too long behind the Iron Curtain. Perhaps they were right to bury it. Some discoveries should remain in darkness. The assignment came directly from the Office of Special Operations in June 1953, just months after Stalin's death. I was summoned to a secure room in the Pentagon basement, where Colonel Mitchell waited with two men I'd never seen before. Colonel Mitchell didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Harmon, you speak Russian fluently and have a background in signals intelligence. You've been selected for a very unique posting," he told me, sliding a folder across his desk. The folder contained minimal information. I was to be attached to a Soviet research installation as part of a classified scientific exchange. Such cooperation was unprecedented during this era of heightened tensions. "The Russians call it Outpost Varga," Mitchell continued after a glance at his silent companions. "Officially, it's a geological research station. Unofficially, we have reason to believe they're developing something there. Something that's causing unusual radio signals our listening posts have detected. Your job is simple. Observe, report back, and ensure American interests are protected." What he didn't tell me was why the Soviets would allow an American into such a facility in the first place. I would soon learn they had their reasons. They needed an outsider, someone who might see what they could not. After a circuitous journey through diplomatic channels, I arrived in Moscow on a rainy August morning. I was met by my handler, a stern-faced NKVD major named Volkov, who made it clear my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. 3 days on the Trans-Siberian Railway followed, then a military transport that took us deeper into the Ural Mountains. With each passing hour, I felt the distance growing between myself and the world I knew. As our truck navigated a treacherous mountain pass in worsening weather, Volkov broke his stoic silence. "Americans think mountains are just rocks, yes? These mountains are different," he said, gesturing at the looming peaks. "The locals won't come here after dark. They say the peaks listen to their thoughts." "Superstition?" I asked. "Of course," Volkov replied with a forced laugh. "We Soviets are men of science now. We do not believe old tales." His laugh told me otherwise. It would be the first of many contradictions I'd encounter at Outpost Varga. Outpost Varga emerged from a heavy snowfall like a steel tumor growing from the mountain itself. Triple fencing topped with razor wire, guard towers with searchlights sweeping the perimeter, and dominating everything, a massive reinforced tunnel entrance burrowing into the mountainside. I was searched 3 times, each checkpoint more thorough than the last. The Soviet guards eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. An American, this deep in their territory, was unprecedented. Inside, I was greeted by Lieutenant Baranov, the communications officer I'd be working alongside. A thin, nervous man with constantly trembling hands, he spoke rapidly as he led me through the concrete corridors. "The American. Yes, we've been expecting you. Your credentials are unusual, but orders are orders. You'll be assisting with signal analysis and translation. he explained, his eyes darting nervously around us. I was told this is a geological research station? I inquired. Baranov's eyes darted around nervously. Yes, of course. That is the official designation, he muttered, lowering his voice. Come, I'll show you to your quarters. As we walked, I noticed scientists in lab coats emerging from the mine entrance, looking exhausted and disturbed. It was immediately clear that whatever they were doing at Outpost Varga, it wasn't simply studying rocks. My assignment was ostensibly to help the Soviets with signal analysis techniques we had developed for detecting nuclear tests. In return, we would receive data on their geological findings. At least, that was the official story Washington and Moscow had agreed upon. Baranov showed me to a small room filled with both American and Soviet equipment, recording devices, oscilloscopes, and radio receivers. Some of the equipment bore strange symbols etched into the metal, unlike any Soviet markings I'd seen before. You'll work here. Monitor these frequencies. Record anything unusual. Translate any English transmissions we might intercept, Baranov instructed. What exactly am I listening for, Lieutenant? I asked, studying the unfamiliar equipment. He hesitated, then handed me a folder marked with those same strange symbols. Anomalous Signals, he whispered anxiously. They began 3 months ago, after the excavation reached the deeper chambers. Some are in languages we cannot identify. Unknown languages? From where? Chinese? Indian dialects? I pressed, skeptical. Baranov looked around nervously, then leaned in until I could feel his breath on my ear. Not from anywhere on this earth, American, he whispered. I assumed this was some kind of test, the Soviets seeing how I would react to disinformation. I would soon learn otherwise. That first night established a pattern. Alone in the dimly lit communications center, I monitored the frequencies as instructed. Most of what I heard was standard atmospheric interference, the usual static and crackle of mountain weather. But then it came, a sequence unlike anything I'd been trained to recognize. 3 rhythmic pulses, followed by 2 longer ones, then silence before repeating. Too regular for natural phenomena, too irregular for any human transmission protocol I knew. In my report to Washington that night, I described it as possible new Soviet encryption. I couldn't have been more wrong. As days turned to weeks, I began to notice disturbing patterns in the facility. Personnel moved through corridors with hunched shoulders and suspicious glances. Conversations stopped when I approached, which I initially attributed to my being American. But soon I realized it wasn't just me they were avoiding. They were avoiding each other. And the sounds from the mine shaft at night. Those weren't the sounds of any geological drilling I'd ever heard. Audio effect, distant, inhuman groaning and scratching. During my required weekly checkup, Dr. Kasimov seemed more interested in my dreams than my physical health. Any unusual dreams, Mr. Harmon? Voices speaking to you when you are alone? Shadows moving at the corner of your vision? He asked, watching me intently. Should I be experiencing these things, Doctor? I countered. Kasimov made a note in my file, his tone suddenly casual. The altitude affects some people strangely. Americans especially, I think. Your minds are more open to suggestion. I caught a glimpse of my file on his desk. It was stamped with the same unusual symbols I'd seen on the communications equipment, and that had begun appearing in my dreams. One night in my 3rd week, while reviewing the day's transmissions, I made a discovery that changed everything. Playing back a sequence at half speed revealed something hidden beneath the static, voices speaking in Russian interspersed with something else. something older. Audio effect, distorted voice emerging from static with subtitles. The voice belonged to Dr. Petrov, the chief scientist who had supposedly been transferred to Moscow 2 weeks earlier. Yet here was his voice, somehow embedded in signals that seemed to emanate from deep within the mountain itself. They sleep beneath, ancient ones. The chambers must remain sealed. His distorted voice warned through layers of interference. As I continued the playback, his voice became increasingly distorted, breaking through thin places between "they hunger after so long." Suddenly the equipment malfunctioned, lights flickering wildly across the panels. As an intelligence officer, I'd been trained to uncover secrets, but some secrets, I was learning, are buried for a reason. That night, I sent a coded message to my handlers in Washington. Possible non-standard phenomena at Soviet facility. Request guidance. Their response was immediate. Continue observation. Collect evidence. Priority Alpha. They wanted proof of whatever the Soviets had discovered. I would soon wish they hadn't asked. My training had prepared me for covert information gathering. That night, I used my security clearance to access the research archives adjacent to the main laboratory. Most files contained what you'd expect: geological surveys, mineral analysis, routine communications. But in a locked cabinet, I found a leather-bound journal marked with Dr. Petrov's name and stamped with the same strange symbols I'd seen elsewhere. The journal began as a standard scientific log, descriptions of unusual cave formations, anomalous mineral deposits, strange acoustic properties in the deeper chambers. But as I read further, the entries became increasingly disturbing. Petrov described discovering an enormous subterranean chamber containing what he called sarcophagi of non-human design. Stone containers covered in symbols that matched no known language but resembled patterns observed in certain deep space radio emissions. His November 12th entry read, "Colonel Tarasov has ordered sarcophagus number 3 opened despite my objections." The Americans would never attempt something so reckless. They don't understand what we're dealing with. These aren't artifacts. They're prisons. And 5 days later, the signal is spreading. We've detected it broadcasting from within the mountain, somehow penetrating solid rock. It carries information, memories perhaps, of beings that existed before mankind. I fear what will happen if the other sarcophagi are breached. That's when I felt it. A presence in the room with me. Not a person, but something watching through the walls themselves. And then, from the facility-wide speaker system, came a voice. Not the official channel, but emerging from the static between frequencies. "Robert Harmon, we see you. Your government sent you to watch us. But now we watch you. Come deeper. See what your Soviet comrades have awakened." Before I could flee, alarms shattered the night. 3 long blasts, the signal for immediate evacuation. Through the archive window, I watched people streaming from buildings toward waiting trucks. Military officers burned documents while scientists destroyed equipment. Radio chatter filled the emergency channels, fragments of panic in both Russian and English. Extraction team lost contact. Multiple breaches in lower chambers. "American, if you can hear this, proceed to evacuation point Alpha immediately." My training demanded I evacuate with whatever intelligence I could salvage. My duty to Washington was clear. But something stronger than duty pulled me toward the source. A compulsion to witness what had been awakened, to understand what both superpowers had stumbled upon in their blind competition. The guards had abandoned their posts. Nothing stood between me and the tunnels that plunged into the earth. The air grew colder as I ventured deeper, heavy with the scent of damp stone and something else, something ancient and wrong, like the breath from a tomb sealed for millennia. Emergency lights flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Each level I descended felt like crossing a threshold into another world. 5 levels down, I found the first casualties. 2 Soviet soldiers, their rifles unfired beside them. No wounds were visible, yet their faces were frozen in expressions of such horror that I had to look away. Their skin had a grayish cast, with fine dark lines spreading like fractures in glass. Nothing in my intelligence training had prepared me for this. I should have turned back. Instead, I continued downward, drawn by a compulsion that overrode my terror. Level 7 showed signs of desperate conflict. Bullet holes scarred the walls. Equipment lay scattered across the floor. A heavy security door had been torn from its hinges, not blown outward by an explosion, but wrenched inward by some incredible force. Beyond it lay a vast cavern. The air vibrated with palpable energy. Massive floodlights revealed the focus of Outpost Varga's true purpose. 7 stone sarcophagi stood in a perfect circle. Each was massive, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. The symbols from Petrov's journal covered their surfaces, pulsing now with sickly greenish luminescence. 3 of the massive lids had been moved aside, revealing empty interiors. Empty, I whispered to myself in horror. Whatever had been contained within was now free. As I stood frozen, the air before me began to shimmer. Reality itself seemed to fold and warp. From that distortion emerged a figure, or something adopting a figure-like form to communicate with my limited perception. It towered nearly to the cavern ceiling, vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion. Limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions. A face suggested rather than defined. A dark void where features should be. Then it spoke, not with words but directly into my mind. Observer from across the ocean. Your kind once knew us, before your nations, before your histories. We were gods to your ancestors. Images flooded my mind. Visions of primordial earth, of civilizations risen and fallen long before recorded history, of cosmic cycles vaster than human imagination. The entity's presence pressed against my consciousness. We slept while your kind crawled from the mud and built your empires, and now the children of Marx have awakened us into a world divided by ideologies we find amusing. What do you want? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The entity's form became less distinct, spreading like smoke through the chamber. Want? We observe the great game between your nations. We watch your atoms split and your missiles aim at each other's hearts. Your Soviet hosts sought weapons in our prison. They did not understand that we are not tools to be wielded. The chamber began to shake violently, dust and rock falling from the ceiling. This place will be sealed again, deeper than before, the entity continued. But we are awakened now, and the bonds between worlds have thinned. We will watch your Cold War, Robert Harmon. And sometimes, we will whisper to both sides. The chamber convulsed. Massive chunks of rock crashed down. The remaining lights exploded, leaving only the pulsing symbols on the sarcophagi to illuminate the chaos. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I scrambled upward through tunnels actively collapsing, squeezing through gaps in fallen debris, lungs burning with effort. I emerged into pandemonium. The compound was being systematically destroyed, not by the earthquake still rocking the mountain, but by deliberate Soviet action. Soldiers detonated explosives while officers destroyed every trace of what had happened here. Operation Scorched Earth, the complete erasure of Outpost Varga from history. In the chaos, I managed to board one of the last evacuating trucks. The Soviets were too consumed by their own terror to question the American in their midst. As we drove into the night, I looked back at the mountain that seemed to be writhing in the throes of rebirth. Behind me, Major Volkov sat silent, his face ashen. "You knew, didn't you? What was down there?" I asked him. Volkov stared into the darkness for a long moment before answering. "Not new, suspected," he murmured. Some things should remain buried." Moscow's official story described a catastrophic mining accident. Washington's classified assessment suggested a failed Soviet weapons test. Both were lies agreed upon by governments that refused to acknowledge what they couldn't explain. My report was filed away, deemed the product of psychological strain and possible Soviet disinformation. I was reassigned to a desk job analyzing agricultural reports, kept where I could do no harm to international relations or my own career. For decades, I remained silent. What purpose would speaking serve? Who would believe me? But as Soviet archives opened after the Cold War, I began searching for others who might have witnessed what I had. I found them, scattered across both superpowers. Scientists, soldiers, intelligence officers, all with fragments of the same nightmare, all silenced by their respective governments. Now, with nothing left to lose, I leave this testimony. Not as Cold War propaganda, but as a warning that some conflicts run deeper than ideology. Some enemies cannot be deterred by nuclear arsenals. In my dreams, I still hear them. In the static between radio stations, in the hum of electrical equipment, in the quiet moments before dawn, they speak. They are patient. They are ancient. And they watch us still, amused by our petty divisions while they wait for the right moment to return. Robert Harmon died in 2005. His journal and collected evidence were discovered by his grandson, who compiled this account. Though officially dismissed as fiction by both American and Russian authorities, declassified documents show that a joint Soviet-American scientific mission did operate briefly in the Ural Mountains in 1953, before being abruptly terminated following what official records call a geological incident.